This is a book breakdown and thoughts opinion video that might take some time. I'm going to be discussing 4 books by the author Ernest Hemingway. It's definitely going to be one of those videos where you might want to hold down onto the screen in order to speed me up. If you're new here, you might be asking yourself, what type of credentials do you offer? And there isn't any. I'm just a self-educated pretentious bitch. But I have read enough of and about Ernest Hemingway where I feel like I'm ready to share some of those thoughts that I got brewing around. If you're not new here, you may be confused because one of my last videos was how a very popular book gave me the ick. And you're totally right. I'm willing to admit he is not without his own controversies, and they're pretty valid. But with this 4-book volume that I have been working on, 2 of which I've already read and 2 which are new reads, I feel like I can come to this with a critical eye. We're going to follow the format in which these books are presented, and that is going to be publishing year. The very first book is going to be The Sun Also Rises, and that was published in the late 1920s. If you don't know anything about Ernest Hemingway, he's known for his simple style of writing, which is probably the reason why I put up with as much as I do when it comes to what he writes. And also for writing novels that really changed the literary scene and seemed to mirror his life experiences, the people he was hanging out with, and the interests he has. This very first novel that he wrote definitely set some of the themes that you'll see with the later novels, and it was the first time that I had ever read it. I liked it, but I'm gonna say that I was very shocked, and I'm gonna consider that maybe it was the time period in which he was writing it, and also youth that made him so bold to use the language he used with his characters and their dialogue. At this time in his life, he was in Paris trying to make it with a young group of writers that would set the tone for the century, and it's from this novel that you might see the phrase "the lost generation" applied to the scene that's being described. It follows a young writer and his group of privileged friends hanging out in Paris and making their way to Spain so that way they can see the bullfights. From the beginning to the middle to the end, offensive language being used. We can say he was definitely writing from a certain perspective. It is very jarring. Another theme that he established here is the love he has for blood sports, a certain type of masculinity that he promotes, drinking, and pursuing women, but also kind of showing a disdain throughout the entire relationship. Up next in the volume is A Farewell to Arms, and this is going to be a war novel that I've already read, so I knew what I was getting into. This was published in 1929, and it is his World War I novel, and it seems to recollect the experiences that he faced. This story follows an American serving in Italy as an ambulance driver, and it really dives into the theme of what comes first: alcoholism, PTSD, and how are they so interrelated. Once again, there's a love interest in this. I don't like how it's used and how it's needed to progress the story along. Up next is For Whom the Bell Tolls. This was the longest book out of all the ones we're going to discuss, and it was also a first-time reading for it. You can definitely see his growth, but there's racial slurs used in every story. This focuses on the Spanish Civil War and was very timely in that it was published shortly before World War II and ended up predicting about how these global wars were going to be going forward. Even skirmishes that you think are small and internal are seeing foreign parties and governments influencing it for their own reasons. This time around, it's going to focus on an American fighting as an explosion expert and the bridge that he is tasked on bringing down. Once again, there's a love interest, but while the fate is different, it was very problematic for me to read. In this novel, his impact was to contribute to the big O, the idea that the earth moved. But since the love interest went through such a horrific event proceeding to how she met the main character, there's no way, from how it's written, from the fictional body language he attributes to the female love interest, that she found satisfaction. So that's my opinion on that. Finally, we have the short novella, The Old Man and the Sea. I believe this is where he gets his Pulitzer. Very quick read. It is the least offensive out of everything that's been presented in here, and it focuses more on aging within society. You can kind of start to see how his fears shift by the time that this novella comes out. I believe this one was published in the 1950s.